Hi, I'm Sean Longdo, and welcome to another episode of Growing Pains, where we talk about the hardships we all face growing companies from inception to exit. And today I've got a very special guest in the field of cybersecurity. Sounds great, doesn't it? Not really, but Terry's going to make it very interesting because he's an expert for anybody growing from inception to he's worked with Sears and billion-dollar companies. So he's specialized in healthcare security, but has also dealt with many startups as a consultant, trying to get their books in order and trying to get their operations in order. Terry is a graduate from Michigan University and DePaul University, for those who care. But most important, he's got 3 decades of experience in cybersecurity, and he's here to tell you all the best secrets. So, Terry, welcome to Growing Pains.
That's my pleasure, Sean.
So, I guess the first question I'd like to ask is your career path that took you from engineering into, I don't know, I'm assuming it was in engineering,
Yeah.
um, straight into security. Why security, and and how did it go from there?
Well, honestly, I kind of stumbled into security. So when I got my bachelor's degree way back in the early 90s, it was interesting. There was really two paths for computer geeks. There was computer hardware and there was computer programming. I didn't get the hardware, so I went software wise. So I learned how to write code in college. Leaving college, then I got my first job. And what I quickly learned, Sean, is that I'm a good at a lot of things. I'm not great at any particular thing, but I can be pretty good at a whole lot of things. And that set me well up for cybersecurity in the early 90s because back then you need to know databases and networking and servering, all these different pieces to kind of hop and forge around environments to find the weaknesses and correct the weaknesses. So it's more breadth of knowledge that led me to cybersecurity. So early 2000s, are working at a cybersecurity consulting group, and I was doing the cool pen testing and security architecture, all the bits and bytes stuff, which was really neato. And then one of the salespeople came over. We're chit chatting there, and she says, "Hey, one of our clients is asking about HIPAA. Who knows anything about HIPAA?" And security techie guys all kind of look around. We had no idea what she was talking about. So I kind of sheepishly raised my hand. I'm like, I don't know, but I'll Google it for you. Of course, this was kind of on the early days of
Oh,
Google. So
Google, yeah.
I will Alta Vista it, or I will Yahoo it. And I went and I printed out the HIPAA regulations. And if you ever had the misfortune of reading it, that's a tough read. But I read all 100 pages and kind of got a feel for what was going on. It's like, I'll be the HIPAA guy. So I started working for clients. And that was when I transitioned from technical to more compliance and risk and really cybersecurity more broadly than the technical. So that path was open to me. I switched. One of my clients hired me to build their security and HIPAA program. And then that's really defines the second phase of my career as an executive. So really, I kind of quickly ramped up the org chart and was a CISO. I got about a decade of experience as chief information security officer at three different large healthcare organizations, due largely probably because there was not a lot of senior security folks at the time.
Sure.
Back in the mid 2000s, the CISO was just kind of coming into fashion. Nobody really knew what it was. I had no mentors, honestly, Sean, which kind of I think I could have been a better CISO if I asked around, if I'm more engaged, but I was kind of on my own out there. So
Was it
less
what,
anyone.
just it's in parentheses, you rode the blip of security issues
Exactly.
around Y2K.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
was that the coming out for all CISOs, and or was that just just something that happened while you were there, and you watched it from
That,
the
that,
side?
that was the Yeah, no, that was one blip, but I was really more on the technical side than the actual compliance and security leadership side for the Y2K blip. The second blip was post HIPAA, as the healthcare organizations started learning what HIPAA was and what it required. That was where there's the second blip of there's a vacuum and we need people we can call the security officer.
Right.
So it was just another timing thing for me. It worked out well. So anyway, I got those leadership positions and really enjoyed it. And at that point, I was mentally transitioning from technical to leadership. spent a lot of time studying healthcare. I
Hmm.
went out, I got a what they call the Fellowship of the American College of Healthcare Executives, which is effectively kind of an MBA for healthcare executives. So the advantage is, Sean, then when I'm talking to the chief nursing officer and I'm talking to the people in charge of medical staff or facilities, I can talk cybersecurity stuff, but I can relate it to business.
Right.
I think that really defines the second part of my career then is taking the technical and the business and merging them together.
And when you say business, you're including user experience of those nursing operations and everything else, or are you talking about the financial wherewithal of them?
Well, all of it, all of it. So when I'm having conversations and I need to do risk assessments in the financial space, I knew what was going on. When we were doing data governance and we were starting to build out big data lakes, I understood conceptually the data and how it supported the organization. Helping the nursing officers, I was in charge of the intranet at one of our organizations, understanding their workflow so we can design the internet to support them. So again, not an expert in everything, but I had a working knowledge of a lot of healthcare. And that was good because that's at the time cybersecurity was maybe still is, but started transitioning from technical to business. Cyber ultimately is a business risk. And if the CISO doesn't understand that and the CISO can't tell the story, he or she's going to fail.
Right.
So that's really, I really learned that skill set is how I can tie cyber to business and make it meaningful. Because at the end of the day, we're not secure for secure sake. We're secure to support the business mission, right? And,
Right.
and, and that's where I kind of learned that skill set.
Okay. I'm gonna double click on a couple things that aren't related to enterprise. Actually, one I'm very curious about. Everybody's now has a smartwatch of some sort, a Fitbit, whether it's Apple or whatever the brand may be. But everybody seems to be recording in digital format their health records.
Mhm.
So we know we're used to institutionalizing EMRs, health electronic health medical records, but now they are widely distributed and not as potentially not as secure. What have you looked at any of that aspect of cybersecurity and what are people doing about their own medical or own health records, be it Strava and their athletic ability or heart rate monitor on a regular watch,
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces to it, but a lot of it comes down, Sean, to data governance. You
right?
know, is Sean's heartbeat tracker on his Apple Watch, is that am I obligated to protect that as his doctor or as his hospital of choice or as your, you're just going to tie to the insurance company soon too.
Sure.
Who owns that data? Who's responsible? Those are some big questions. On that same vein, the questions we've been asking of personal technology is not so much security today, but availability. So we were working with one of our health systems. They were building out um, smart homes using Alexa, smart homes for paraplegics. And the
Okay.
idea being, hey, open my door or turn on the lights. And there was an outage of Amazon about 10 years ago. There's this DNS kind of wonky network thing. AWS kind of went offline for quite an extended period. Paraplegics, they can't use their smart home anymore. So yeah, the protection availability of consumer grade technology supporting healthcare services, it's certainly a concern. There is no easy answer, but I tell you, you got to think through the process. A lot of companies get in trouble because they just don't think about the risk management.
And this is going to an insurance side of it. For athletic people, is it an advantage to be sharing that data with a provider to demonstrate you're a lower risk
Mhm.
versus people who have to wear a device because they are high risk? And
Yeah.
and what's and again, this may not fall into your domain, but I'm very interested in your opinion.
Well, I do see the advertisements for the auto insurance where you can put a little monitor on your car and they'll give you a discount.
Yeah, no, I would get lost in that one.
So would the same thing apply? It's interesting because it also goes to privacy and control of data.
Right.
So if you give your jogging records to your insurance company to get a 5% discount, can they sell it to the shoe company to come back and offer you discounts on your running shoes?
Hmm.
The control of the data is really a big concern. GDPR covered a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
California's laws are covering that. So who owns Sean's data? If you give it up to the insurance company, where does it go? who owns it,
Right.
who's responsible. So again, to me, it's back to data governance. That data has a lot of value, a lot of potential risk to it, a lot of privacy concerns. So that'd be interesting because we're certainly not making any less data. It's always more and more data.
No, exactly, exactly. And you brought up the bright side of having, getting a discount on shoes because your insurance company sees you're running a lot. But insurance companies love to collect and very seldom like to pay. So they might say, hey, you've been running slower. There's something else going on. You've got a prior condition. We're not going to pay. Who knows, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because you can delve all sorts of neat insights into those pockets of data. There's the famous story, was it 10, 15 years ago, where this family was started getting coupons from, I think it was Target, for maternity stuff,
Okay.
baby food, baby clothes, whatever it may be. What happened is the wife's shopping habits changed significantly. The retail store picked it up and put her on the pregnant person list. So husband may or may not have known, the wife may or may not have known, it may be
Right.
inaccurate, but you can delve all sorts of information out of that. And then what?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to companies and trajectory. And
Yeah.
I mean, let's go from a startup. What would, they don't have a lot of money. They're hacking in Ruby on Rails to get a product up and out the door.
Yep.
Security does not factor in until product market fit and revenue generates, right? So, I mean, that's generally the practice. In my experience, what would you suggest for an early stage company that is bootstrapping its way to its first rounds?
Yeah. The guidance I give everyone, honestly, it comes down to a pretty simple concept. Devil's always in the details, but the simple concept is you need to think through what's your right level of security, and then you got to get a plan to get there. If you're a startup, the proper level of security is pretty darn low. If you're an existing healthcare company, it's pretty darn high.
Yeah,
And it's going to change maybe every quarter, every year as you grow, as you get revenue, the expectations go up. Because HIPAA, even if you were to read HIPAA, it says very specifically risk management and do appropriate protections. The appropriate being, how big your organization is and what the size of the risk is, so they account for the size of the organization. So
gotcha.
as a startup, ask yourself how secure you have to be, and a lot of that, Sean, comes down to the simple question of what do we need to do to be able to sell? If you want to sell to a healthcare organization or a bank or insurance or to the government or even to consumers,
Mhm.
there's expectations on what's the right level of security that's out there if you look for it and you kind of think through those processes. But
Right,
clarity is available, but you got to ask the right questions and do a little bit. At least starting one, number one is understand the right line.
right, right. And so, for example, SOC 2 compliance is one of those basic standards. What level would you suggest that companies start to consider that? Obviously, as you just described, think about who you're selling to and that you have to be compliant for them to be compliant. But would you go there if you were bootstrapping and weren't selling to, you were going B2C or something like that? Well,
Well, there's a lot of certifications and audits. SOC 2 is technically an audit. There's a lot of external things you can do, but again, I would not do any of them until you need to.
right.
Need is typically based on your prospects. So hopefully you understand who your prospects are already. You understand who you will be selling to, and you understand their expectations. Keep in mind, SOC 2 in particular is not a short journey.
No.
The other things that are out there again are typically not short journeys. So yeah, SOC 2 is a good one because it's broad. It's not terribly it's not terribly prescriptive. Thou
Mhm.
shalt do these 500 things, but rather it's a here's a framework. How are you addressing the framework, and then are you doing what you say you're doing? That effectively is the SOC 2 journey, but you can right size it. You can work with the auditors understand what's the right level of security there. But again, when's the right time? You need to do it soon enough, but not too soon. is what I'll tell you.
Right. Okay. And would you think, and in early stage, I mean, we would do it to get a client in my other companies.
Yep.
Um, to get the award. If but we also do it for the insurance company to protect ourselves. But most people will probably just do the minimum viable execution of those matters for compliance, which seems like an exercise in satisfying another party as opposed to really defending the fort. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. And if you're thoughtful about how you build your security program, Sean, you kind of do it all at one time. So when you build a security program, you don't want to base it on, well, Terry says this is what we have to do, therefore we're going to do it and we're good because Terry says we're good, or Sean or anyone else. There's frameworks out there. The most common one is NIST CSF. You may have heard of that. It's
Mhm.
a nice broad structure and it'll walk you through, hey, for your program, do you have executive support? Do you know where you're supposed to encrypt? Do you train your users? Do you have business continuity? It's a very broad structure, which is excellent. Use that as your framework. Goal not being to get everything knocked out day one, maybe not even year three. It's going to take a while to work through it, but it gives you a broad structure with common language that you can communicate with your external folks. Your third party risk assessments that your clients have, they're going to talk NIST CSF language. Now, as you do NIST CSF, you can kind of align that with your SOC 2. So you really don't have any extra efforts per se,
Right.
but that's where you'll align your NIST with your SOC 2, with your HIPAA, with your PCI, whatever it may be. Generally, you don't have a lot of odd, unique requirements out there. They're typically all in these frameworks.
Right.
Maybe some niche you have to work with, but establishing the framework and scaling that framework to meet whatever your expectations are is the right way to go. So you don't lose the effort.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then if I was just going to go back to it's funny, NIST, one of these acronyms without a vowel is always hard to pronounce. SAS is easy, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
um, if you were so are you seeing changes based on what's happening with AI and all of the security risks that could be associated with that in terms of policies and the
Sure,
like?
sure. AI is an interesting beast because it's really kind of hard to define it. My definition of AI is different than yours and from everyone else's. So keeping that in mind, there's tools that have AI in it. So in the security world, everything has an AI component nowadays. And frankly, it's been like that for 5+ years. And that's great because what it does is it allows the tools we've been using to work better.
Yep.
So be able to detect malicious software, malicious activity. AI is built in automatically and it does its work. That's great. Definitely use that, get the value out of that. Now, this generative AI and machine learning and kind of using our data in new ways with artificial intelligence, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Hmm.
And to me, that starts with a conversation of data governance.
Yeah.
What's our data? Where does it sit? Who owns it? What are the expectations? What can we do with it? Questions like that. If you don't have data governance, if you don't have agreement on what you can and can't do with your data, you're in for a world of hurt because that's all it does is it uses data and it spits it out and it goes who knows where's it going, but you
Yeah.
got to think of those things. But yeah, start with data governance. What's your data? Where does it exist? That's what has to happen for AI to work safely.
Great advice on generative AI. I'm thinking more, well, it's generative AI in a form, things like Copilot in with Git, right?
Yep.
So, almost 80% of our own code is written by Copilot. We have great prompt engineers.
Yeah.
How is that impacting when you're assembling code, the security of DevOps and operations?
Yeah. So that goes into, in my mind, there's multiple steps to go through code development. Writing the code is kind of early in the cycle, the repetitive cycle, but it's kind of early in the cycle. That generated code, whether it's by Sean or by Sean's computer, Chat GPT or whatever it may be, that still needs to flow through the process of your compliance review and your code analysis and dependency validation, whatever else has happened down the ways. So in general, if you have a solid DevSecOps process, that has all the tools and it's properly structured and the validation and the compliance, whether it's Sean hacking on the keyboard or Sean's computer hacking on the keyboard, it flows through there. A sound process and tool set should leave you in a pretty good position regardless of how you generate code.
Okay. Okay. And do you have any recommended best practices in that? You described having it in the earlier stage. A lot of people look at security as an afterthought.
Yeah.
So it seems like it's fitting into the whole sequence of events.
Well, it's actually comparable to the idea of NIST CSF. You have a framework for data protection for your organization. There are well-defined DevSecOps frameworks and processes that are out there to say make sure you have change control and people are trained and you've got rollback plans and you got your code analysis and again, whatever it may be. Don't create this framework validation on your own. Go find a best practice one. OWASP has one that I've audited against.
Okay.
They've got, hey, these are the 20 things you have to do, and maybe annually validate yourself against those checks that OWASP or whatever your framework is going to be. And again, that'll give you a nice comprehensive review that a community of experts have looked at. So it works very similar to an organizational framework like NIST CSF. There's there for the subcomponent of DevOps and DevSecOps.
Okay. Okay. And on that note, have you seen any wildly superior new products come out that are kind of off the shelf products that people can buy to help manage their security and compliance without having to actually, that it self-manages?
I have not been wowed by any of them because I don't buy enterprise grade software anymore.
Okay.
But from compliant, there's a lot of neat change control and process management built into your GitHub these days. There's compliance tools like Vanta that'll help you get and maintain SOC 2 compliance. So there's tools that are out there. They're pretty good. They're not great again because you're not buying Archer or some big super expensive tool set to work with. But they're nice again that they give you that framework. They'll typically say if you want to use Vanta, here's how you get SOC 2 compliant. If you want to use for example, Microsoft has all of its policy validations within their Azure environments.
Right.
Go open up Azure policy tool and turn on SOC 2 and it'll pop up and say, hey, from a technical controls perspective, these are the things we suggest you put in place. It's an excellent way to jumpstart your SOC 2 or your HIPAA compliance. So they're good. They get you started. They're certainly not the end all be all. You'll need expertise to configure it. You'll need a process where you can do exception management because you're never going to 100% align. You've got the operational component of how do we maintain it once we build it. So again, the tools are out there, but realize that they are tools and they're gonna help you, but they're nowhere near the final destination for what you need.
Right. So it's got to be your SOPs that are drilled in every employee. This is how we, yeah. Very
exactly.
tough when you're early stage companies because everyone's working so hard and they don't want, and just like a salesperson being told they've got to enter the data into CRM.
I agree 100% because we're all just trying to get our jobs done. We're all, especially at startups, we're all passionate, we're all smart, we're all good at a lot of things. But what I'll tell you is I come into those startups 3 or 4 years later, after 3 or 4 years of organic growth, and you're like, oh, good Lord, where are you? How did you get here?
Yeah.
So I think it's a process for those fast moving companies. You don't want to slow your folks down. Business has to run. You got to churn this code out. So get your tools and your processes that, I always say as good or better, that are as good or better than you currently are at. So go get improvement without slowing things down. But take the time to review it every quarter, every 6 months, every year. We're going to review against OWASP every year. We're going to do some kind of NIST alignment every 6 months, whatever it may be. Are we ready to be, or do we need to be a little bit better this cycle? So keep in mind, these tools and these processes are going to evolve as your company evolves. And you're evolving quickly as a startup. So take that time, take that few hours a quarter to do a thoughtful, systematic review of what you're doing and see if things have to change.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. So you cycle in the pain at the lowest cycle of your business.
There you go. That's exactly
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be secure enough. It's that's the message. Be secure enough. But
Okay.
the enough changes every couple quarters as you grow.
So a friend of mine used to be in the house security business. And I said, what is the absolute best for keeping a house secure? And he had he was a representative of a whole bunch of lines of electronic products. He said, a good dog that barks a lot. So,
Exactly.
which begs the question, is there ever secure enough? I mean, it just seems like if someone wants to get in, they will get in.
Absolutely. So the buzzword these days, Sean, if you haven't heard, or buzz phrase, I guess, is business resiliency.
Right.
And the general idea is something bad will happen. We want to make it as unlikely as possible, and we want to make it as least impact as possible. But something's going to happen. How do we make sure our business continues to survive in this case? And a lot of that is these are non-technical things because again, bad stuff happens. How do we do payroll? Can we get into our email? Do we understand our contractual obligations with our process with our clients? Do we understand the requirements for our cyber insurance? So again, it's the non-technical business protection. What do we do if all heck hits the fan? Business resiliency, that really is the buzz these days.
Okay. And is that mostly, I mean, it's a playbook that you pull it out of the fire alarm drill thing, but is it something that is mostly around communications, or I mean, is it a PR play as much as anything else? Because you don't know what's happened to you when you've been hacked, right?
Yeah, it's actually even more foundational than that, Sean. It goes back to the idea of a business impact analysis. So,
Okay.
Sean's company, what are the five things that must happen for us to survive as a business? Again, it's going to be whatever, support our contracts. Payroll's always one people that miss. So, whatever it may be, what are the five or six most important business processes, technology agnostic, just your processes?
Gotcha.
And then what are you going to do if this process goes down?
Okay. And you recommend having that disaster plan in advance, or you find out about it, you look it up after. I guess the answer to that is obvious, but
It is, but I will tell you that there are big plans and there are small plans. If you
right,
know, in the course of 2 hours, you can do a reasonable thumbnail of again what's really important to us as a business, and then what do we do if there's some break in the technology fails. In 2 hours, you can at least have a reasonable idea of well we're covered or we have a big gap here. And again, every year then you go through and the 2 hour exercise becomes a 4 hour exercise next year. Maybe
right.
it's a full day the year after that. So build upon that, but at least ask the questions. It's really a heat map.
Yeah,
If everything's SaaS, you're probably in pretty good shape for most situations because QuickBooks goes on offline. It's going to come back eventually. And you can't do anything about it anyway. But at least you've thought through those processes.
right.
Um, your Google Gmail may go down for an hour or two. You just have to accept it. But again, asking what's important and what do we do, even with a short exercise, adds a lot of value.
Okay. So you would say SaaS has increased security in operations dramatically for most companies.
It certainly has because all the hard stuff's typically managed by vendor
Right.
patching and backups, encryption, the stuff that really is a pain in the butt. Let them deal with it. However, keep in mind that you have the what AWS calls and I think everyone calls this shared security model.
Hmm.
So you don't do backups, you don't do patching, but you need to make sure Sean is who he says he is. You
Right.
got to make sure Sean knows how to protect his phone. You need to make
Right.
sure Sean doesn't give his password to Terry. So, of the big stack of security concerns, all the techie and physical stuff is handled by your SaaS, but you still got a chunk of responsibility. Data governance, bring that back up. How can Sean use the data that's in Sugar CRM, whatever it may be?
Right.
The data governance concepts, that's your responsibility as well. So there's really not a lot of new requirements, but you got to focus on the ones that are yours.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And another friend of mine who ironically is in the cybersecurity business, or he as part of his consultancy practice,
Mm-hmm.
he was held hostage, right?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but he fortunately had redundancy, so he could shut everything off on the one side and reopen the business on the other. When and where do you recommend that for a company? Or is that just so rare that it's not worth it?
So by held hostage, you mean a big ransomware event?
Yeah, ransomware.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I thought he was physically held hostage. I'm like,
No,
oh,
no,
they're
no, no, no. Yeah,
pretty serious.
electronic
Uh,
ransom.
Yeah. So again, ransomware then would be part of your business resiliency. If you have ransomware, what are you going to do? That should be part of the exercise. Because ransomware, again, of your totality of your technology, where's ransomware going to hit? Is it going to hit everything? Possibly. But if you think back to, we have 5 critical business processes and maybe emails offline, but everything else is okay. That would be one strategy.
Right.
Emails offline, and I don't know, we can't do accounts receivable or accounts payable. That's another strategy. So I would tie it back to business impact analysis. Again, a couple hour exercise for small companies. What's important to us, and what do we do if it goes down?
Great advice.
It would depend on the scope. Interesting story. I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Yeah.
and they got hit with ransomware. The county about 7 years ago, and it brought all the stuff down. It was a mess. It was in the news. You couldn't pay bills, stuff like that. They got all back and running. But one of the messages people didn't hear is that of the totality of the technology by the county, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, some of the servers were offline for a full 7 weeks.
Wow.
So telling the story to business leaders, what do you do if one function were down for 7 weeks? Can you survive?
Right.
Again,
Right.
the objective is not, you're never going to say you're 100% ransomware proof. You may get hit one day. Part of your business impact analysis, if email's down for more than a month, we're going to do this. If it's down for a week, we're going to do that. These things happen, and sometimes your backups don't work correctly, or you can't get access to whatever your system may be. Sean has the password, but Sean left because he just won the lottery or whatever it may be. So again, you want to make it unlikely and least painful as possible. But if things were to happen, take some time and think through, what are you going to do?
Right. Right. No, very, very good advice. And so the big begs the question though, there a statement I've heard a few times, there are only two kinds of people in technology, those who what is it? Those who think they're going to get hacked or they've been hacked, and those who don't think they're going to get hacked, but all of them are going to get hacked. And that's
Correct.
inevitable. So where does that sit with you? And is it true that everyone's going to get hacked at one point or another?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone will get hacked if they have it. And hack's kind of a squishy, funny word.
Yeah.
If your
There'll be a breach of
CEO,
your of security in
well,
some way.
breach is important, but even go so far as, what if the CEO loses access to his or her LinkedIn profile?
Right.
That's going to directly impact your organization.
Right.
If the CFO loses his or her laptop, what are you going to do? There's a lot of incidents out there. Those are all cybersecurity incidents. They're not a breach or a hack per se, but you got an adverse incident event in the general sphere of responsibility. So yeah, absolutely, it will happen. There's no doubt about it. Um, Risk management, though, is kind of the key thing, is risk management. We're not going to make all risks go to zero, but just like your top 5 business processes that must work, go through the exercise of, what are the top 5 cyber incidents we think are going to hit us.
Mm.
Ransomware should be in the list. Phishing should be in the list. Account takeover should be. So think of the top 5 things you're worried about as a group. And again, even with a short conversation, what do you do if Sean's email gets taken over? What are you
Right.
going to do?
Right.
If Terry loses a laptop, what are you going to do if we get ransomware? So the risk-based approach is nice because, again, it allows us not to think about the totality of how do we get to 100% protection. It's how do we deal with the big stuff. And on that vein, actually, I I gave a series of presentations, Sean, for a legal group here in the Carolinas. Some small law practices. And at the time, I had no experience dealing with legal in the cyberspace. So I did some research. The American Bar Association had guidance, this was 5 years ago, on cyber insurance for small legal practices. It was like a 20-page document, a lot of fluff and nonsense. I'll summarize the whole thing in one sentence. They said, go be pretty good at cybersecurity and then buy a crap load of insurance. That was it. And that's reasonable. Go be pretty good. And pretty good. Hopefully that bar is going to change. Go be good, but then be prepared for the worst case scenario. So
Right.
whether it's business resiliency planning we talked about, incident response planning we talked about, insurance, go be good, and then be able to manage the stuff you can't handle.
Okay, that might have been good advice 5 years ago. I'm curious, as cybersecurity and infiltration starts to proliferate,
Mm-hmm.
how have insurance companies responded? And similar to health, what's the payout against what they're insured for?
Yeah, that's interesting because the cyber insurance industry is in flux. You hear stories that they're making millions of dollars or lots and lots of money. You hear stories they're going broke too. So
Yeah,
it's
the
kind of
risk
hard to
must be up and up and up for sure.
exact. The premiums go up absolutely, and you got to watch if you buy cyber insurance. The scoping they're carving out bits that they're not going to do. Acts of war is the new hot phrase. If you get ransomware that came from North Korea that they're using to bypass the sanctions against North Korea. Is
Right.
that an act of war? I don't know. I don't know. So those things are starting to come to a head, and I know there's lawsuits in that space. Uh, so read your policy carefully, and frankly, it's a hard read. So make sure your agent's reading it for you to understand it. But when you do get your policy, there are certain expectations. So make sure that you contact them when you're supposed to contact them. You do the evidence management. Maybe there's incident management expectations in the policy. So that watch the expectations in the policy. Before you buy the policy, be thoughtful and very honest about what controls you have in place. Because pretty much always there's questionnaires. Do you do
Mhm.
this, do that, and you're filling out your form? Make sure you're honest and accurate with that, because that could be a way for them to deny the claims.
Right. Right. So for some reason, I just don't have confidence there's competence in the insurance industry to keep up with the changes in technology
Well, the
in
problem
assessment
is
and in, at scale and in being able to be on top of the protections that are required.
well, that's the hard part. If you're dealing with a small company and you're going to give them a one-page security checklist, what questions do you ask?
Right. Yeah.
Again, you could pay someone $30,000 to give you a security assessment, tell you where your problems are, but to boil it down to 12 questions or 20 questions, it's hard. So it's the sort of competency model. Do you have the basic competencies in place? Now, where we get to the point where insurance says, I'm going to give you a 25% discount if you have SOC 2,
Oh,
that's
okay.
going to be the needle. When they say, if you let us do X, Y, Z, if we can put a tool in your environment to show you're secure, we'll give you a 50% discount. So
Ah,
that I think maybe something that moves the needle is when business leaders see a direct value prop for the security
to
headaches.
to execute on security. That's very good. And so that brings me to my next question, which is, given that the tech sector has seen obviously a decline in funds available, been told to extend runway, all these things that were, you do security to protect yourself against something that may happen, but you've got to do stuff that needs to happen. And so where in your, on a scale of 1 to 10, where it was maybe 2 years ago, no problem selling securities consulting, for example, or anything to do with security was a no-brainer. Now it's a trade-off decision. Where in the scale of things are you seeing security against, say, go-to-market teams or priority in spending is what I'm asking.
I I tell you that there's a lot of clarity now for these small companies on the right level of security. So security becomes important when you can't sell your product.
Hmm.
And that's the driver. We touched on this a little bit already in our conversation, but when you're going to a prospect and they say, you need to fill out this third party assessment. So everyone's seen those. Those are the big spreadsheets of questions. And in there, they talk about your SIM. You got to buy a SIM. Those aren't cheap. You have to have 24/7 monitoring. How do you have SOC 2 audit? You completed a SOC 2. So you get clarity on what your prospects and clients are expecting, and you build your security. That becomes your back to the idea of your what's the right line of security for you. The right level is as a startup is you got to be good enough to sell. So that's really the driver. Frankly, I would not get a SOC 2 day one because you don't need a SOC 2. You
Right.
need a SOC 2 when you're dealing with bigger companies and they say, hey, before we sign a contract, show me a SOC 2. Keeping in mind, a SOC 2 is not a 1 month effort. It's a long journey. Not necessarily hard, maybe moderately expensive, but it is a long journey because it's a retrospective audit. You got to kind of look backwards after you build everything. So it'll take a while to get there. So what I would suggest, the idea of figure out what's the right line of security, but also build and be able to tell your cybersecurity story. As a small company, you should be able to say, we're aware of NIST CSF framework, and that's what we're building against. You should be able to say, we have a security executive on team. We have an IT organization that's 24/7 monitoring. We're planning in 18 months to do SOC 2. We have XYZ. So part of that, a founder and the startup folks need to have multiple stories in their pockets.
Hmm.
One of the stories should be cybersecurity because no one expects you to be Fort Knox, but you
Right.
have to be good enough and you have to be able to explain to them that you're going to get better as you grow.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Terry, that wraps it up for us today. Listen, thank you so much for your advice. I'm sure it's going to be well received. And is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had asked you?
uh, no, but I'll add one thing in it, Sean. One last tidbit, Sean, for the group. When you think about security for small businesses, another thing to consider is that there's a lot of perspectives of cybersecurity. So I've given presentations on this topic. In addition to protecting your app or whatever you're building, you also need to protect your business. Your business is more likely to get hacked than your app, just statistically speaking. It may not be as painful, but they're going to get in your email and your bank and rerouting invoices much more likely to get in your app.
Hmm.
So don't just focus on your app, focus on your business, focus on what your investors are telling you, focus on what your prospects are telling you, focus on what your consumers are telling you. So keep in mind, there's a lot of points of view when it comes to cybersecurity. Be mindful to those outside perspectives because if you have one covered but the rest not, it does you nothing. You've got to be good at everything.
Bonus, great advice. Thank you very much, Terry.
My
And
pleasure.
how can people reach you if they want to learn more?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my organization, northwonders.com. So we're a cybersecurity fractional executive group. Again, northwonders.com.
Okay. Thank you very much, Terry, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you, Sean.